Good morning. It's Friday morning. It's 7:30-ish, and it's time for coffee, buses, and politics. Arnold Palmer once said that he dressed to match the game he expected from his opponents. Good morning, Martin.
Good morning.
Should say it's Martin's birthday, so a very happy birthday, 21 again.
For the 39th time, yeah.
Yeah. And also we have Alex Bulett, and Stephen Ferguson and me. So we've got quite a lot of things to go through. So we're going to talk about Nigel Farage targeting Fenland, Angela Rayner at the Local Government Association, an update on the County Council. But first, we're going to talk about the Histon and Impington ward by-election result yesterday. The results were so 5 candidates. In last was Will Mason of the Labour Party. Fourth was Clive Pelborough Power for the Conservatives. Then it was Catherine Fisher for the Greens on 420. The Independent Edward Stonham on 617. And James Rickson of the Lib Dems was elected with 942 votes. Turnout was 28.6%. So what do we think?
I mean, I could say, from the Conservative perspective, I think they'll be disappointed with that. I think there's a message here which I think it says something about the Labour Party because, the fact that they came bottom. But I think it also says that even though the government has become unpopular quite quickly, and I don't think that's an issue for Keir Starmer. I've said that before, but I personally, I think the Conservatives will be disappointed. It's a clear message that the people of Histon and Impington are not ready to forgive the Conservatives, not by a long shot. That doesn't surprise me, but that message is there, and I know I understand they put a bit of effort into it as well. So, yeah.
It was a hard-fought by-election, wasn't it? Especially given the fact that it was always going to be a Liberal Democrat victory. It's right in their heartlands as well, but lots of people threw a lot of effort into it. Turnout is still pretty poor, isn't it? 28.6%. Not great, but also not awful compared to general by-election results as well. So, and the Labour vote collapsed, didn't it? So Labour, I'd have thought that Histon Impington, so that's part of the parliamentary constituency what I stood for. And Catherine Fisher, the Green, who did very well, getting over 400 votes, was one of the parliamentary candidates as well. She did exceptionally well. But I'd have thought that Histon Impington was on the edge. It feels like the edge of Cambridge, and therefore a bit more of a Labour vibe around there. But that hasn't shown at all, has it, in the results? I know it's always going to be a Lib Dem heartland, or has been for a while.
I think it depends on the areas. Obviously, has Orchard Park, which you'd say, demographically speaking, you'd expect more of a Labour vote. I wouldn't say so much in Histon. I've been there once, so just to kind of preface this, I've been there for like an hour once, so I don't have a lot of local knowledge or understanding compared to other by-elections where I could see how the campaign moved like over time. It was like kind of more interesting to compare. I personally kind of predicted. I was on the train back to London. I had like a long day in London yesterday, so I was on that like 11 p.m. train back, and the result was announced around midnight. And basically I was on the train and Luke was saying, "Oh, the result is out, guess the order," and I guessed it exactly right. I think for me it was entirely predictable. I think with the Independent was interesting. I think it would have been quite close. It was close. Because obviously Ed has been candidate in other previous elections, is on the town council, is quite well known. Like I did follow him a bit on social media as well, so I thought it would be like a kind of a close second Independent, with the Lib Dem still winning, partly because it has been Lib Dem seat before, but also because of the effort they put in. If you look at, for example, the literature and some of the probably there were maybe like 4 or 5 Lib Dem leaflets with their general kind of target seat strategy, so there was like a lot of effort. But what was really interesting is how much other parties have targeted it. So obviously the Greens, had like a polling day, like a full polling day operation, which you don't, in many seats. I think that was also partly because Catherine, who was, as Stephen mentioned, the parliamentary candidate for the seat, was standing, and she's a very good campaigner. And I think
Really good,
lots
yeah.
of people came out to campaign for her as well. So I've seen, like photos on social media of like very large teams of Green Party members campaigning there, which doesn't happen unless it's a kind of a Green target seat, really. So I think it was also like, because the general election was quite recent and Catherine stood in this area, that is something that kind of like still lived on from that, as well as that she's, I think, a very good candidate. I follow some of the hustings. I think she's very persuasive, like she has experience, and she ran a good campaign. But what I didn't expect is how many conservatives from outside of the area actually came to support the candidate. Obviously their conservative candidate is from Huntington. He's actually involved in the Conservative Association here, and I have seen various like MPs, previous parliamentary candidates for the Tories, potential mayoral hopefuls, like candidates, all coming down to support the Conservative candidates. So I really thought like, oh, they're really targeting the seat, because there were like quite a lot of high profile names there, as opposed to having a campaign based more on your local membership, which usually happens. So they're not targeting the seat, really.
I mean, it is worth saying and reminding that it was a Conservative seat in the past as well. So
yeah,
that I think the Conservatives will be disappointed with fourth place. I think they would have expected the Lib Dems to be favourite, and congratulations to James Rickson, by the way. But I do think they would have expected to do better than fourth place, and I think I think they'll be disappointed. And it does send a statement out, whether it's peculiar to Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire, because I haven't seen any other by-election results yet. But if it is peculiar to that, or whether it's a national thing that people are still not voting Conservative, it sort of backs up something I've said, that that if the Labour Party become unpopular, because people are still not ready for the Conservatives, what happens next? What happens, and I fear for the Conservatives at the next general election, unless they get their act in order very quickly.
If you look at the vote share, this was last contested in 2022 because it's a by-election, and the vote share for Lib Dems, Independents, and Conservatives is basically the same as it was in 2022. The big difference is the Greens have increased their vote share, and the Labour vote share has almost halved, which I think is an indication of what it's like to be a party of government, isn't it? You're gonna lose some support immediately, and it'll be tougher for Labour in by-elections going forward, I think, unless something big happens in the country.
Yeah, I mean, the jargon is that they're second-order elections. People are more likely to give the governing party a kicking because it feels safe. The only thing to say, though, is that I wonder if there was still tactical voting going on. People who are going to vote, it's like realistically round there, it was going to be Lib Dems or Conservatives, and so people voted Lib Dem.
I think what's really interesting there, and that's it, is actually the independent vote, and how, again, having seen some of the literature being there, again, you have the classic Lib Dem bar chart being it's Labour or the Tories, when for me, as someone, really like from outside the area, just looking at the candidates, following some of their profiles, so it's pretty clear to me that the independent had like a strong presence and like quite a bit of personal vote. And yes, of course, the Lib Dem campaign was really, it's the same as if you don't want the Tories really would take the seat, vote Lib Dem. So yes, I do think there's a bit of tactical vote going on if you're having that messaging. But it's really interesting how the independent came quite a close second, and no one was really speaking about that, when it was quite obvious to me, like he obviously had stood before and had the presence and had like quite a good chance. I'm not sure how much he campaigned, or like the campaign strategy in that sense. Obviously some of the party candidates had a lot more resources, lots more leaflets, but there's also this question about like kind of like leaflet fatigue and how many bar charts can you put out, because indeed I think there were many of Lib Dem leaflets, probably like quite a lot more like Green Party literature like pieces than there were before, given the amount of people they had there to deliver as well, and the focus on the campaign, as compared to perhaps the independent maybe having, I would say, like one or maybe two leaflets, or I don't know, the Labour candidate probably having one leaflet. So I think it's really interesting kind of how much effort was put into each campaign, and especially in a shorter campaign.
It's
So
worth saying. It's worth saying that Ed, the independent candidate, did quite a lot of better than I did in Histon Limpington as well, because I made no impact at all. It's a by-election, which is different. And I don't know him, but I've talked a bit on social media with him, and he seems like a decent chap. And he also borrowed my pink and black branding, which goes to show that it's an independent brand. I'm really glad about that as well.
Does anybody think it makes any sort of commentary on the county council elections next year?
We should talk about that soon. There's some new factors at play in the county council elections, I think, which David is about to reveal.
I was actually going to say that pink and black. I assumed that this was a tribute to Brett the Hitman Hart from WWE. And if you won, you were going to pick up the returning officer and do a suplex. No. For people joining us on the various social channels, if you do have any questions or comments, do put them, and we'll see them. Saying about the county council, well, I'll tell you what. Let's start with how there's been quite a lot going on at the county council, and some rather good to see, some rather good cross-party working. Alex, do you want to lead off on this, seeing as it was your motion?
Well, it depends what you want to speak about full council, because the full council on Tuesday had a number of controversial things as well, including the discussion on, the debate on CSAT. But yeah, motion-wise, there were 4 motions because the winter fuel allowance motion that the Conservatives proposed that has been withdrawn, so we end up having 4 debates on 4 motions, 3 Liberal Democrat motions. And my motion on community safety. I think all of them were voted like on a cross-party basis. Yes, because the 3 Liberal Democrat motions are quite uncontroversial and things that people could agree on, broadly speaking, like, the remaining work needs to be done on the A14 project and the issues there, for example. I think everyone across political differences doesn't agree, they agree with. In terms of community safety, so like every time I write a motion, and this is the whole debate around, is a motion what purpose does a motion have to fulfill? And I think a lot of motions across councils, across political parties are done with a political purpose to, write a letter that's political or whatever. What I try to do with like every motion, I've done so many topics, from like supporting farmers to ethical advertising to like armed forces to like name any like topic in the last 3 years and a half. I've probably spoken about at least one of them, is community safety. And I try to already write it like in a kind of like cross-party basis, because community safety, let's be honest, is something that is raised with every single councillor, regardless of like, how you vote or what party you're from. And I think it's something that we should debate across the council and not score political points on, right? So what does the motion ask for, right? Because for me also the other important thing is it actually asks something we can do within the council, because it's very easy to say, well, we should write to government or to this department and ask for this. Now, obviously you have to include one of those asks, but you also have to include something a bit more practical, in my view. So in terms of the letter writing exercise, it asks 2 things. Like, one is around the funding for fairer funding for our police. So we're the 4th lowest funded force across the UK, and that obviously has impact in our ability to tackle crime and antisocial behavior. There have been a lot of criticism over the years across parties around the funding formulas, how funding is allocated for that, and particularly how, especially in recent years, how the population has grown so significantly in our county and the funding hasn't really caught up. So that's why we're in the bottom of the funding list, amongst other factors. So it's asking around that. And also, like, the other ask to government is around neighborhood police officers. So you'll remember the Labour manifesto saying we recruit 13,000 new neighborhood police officers. What I'm asking is, how would those be fairly distributed across the areas that need those additional recruits, and also offering local people opportunities to train and fill in those roles. Those are kind of like things that are decided nationally, but it's good for us as a council to have a view on that, especially on the funding situation. I know other councillors, including Conservatives, have had this view in the past that the funding allocation doesn't work as well as it should be. And then the local stuff is actually around the White Ribbon campaign. So we have White Ribbon ambassadors, who are promoting work on, violence against women and girls and tackling that. I think it's really important to have, men speaking, like in the space of the White Ribbon campaign, including like male counselors. And I was discussing this with the communities team at the county council and said it would be great to actually, as we're working now towards reaccrediting ourselves as the council for the White Ribbon campaign, is to actually have representatives across the different directorates, and also to do more like on the kind of like comms and support. And the motion highlights various channels where we can do better at communicating the support available from the council and partner organizations. So it was kind of it. The Conservatives put in an amendment, like 6-word addition, saying that the neighborhood police officers, when we're asking about those to national government, should be fully funded from the central police grant. Yes, indeed. I mean, like Steve Count made a speech, say, trying to perhaps highlight that I didn't see how that contradicts the manifesto. Like, I don't disagree with him, and to be honest, I wouldn't be the person to reject an amendment and to do a debate on an amendment and split the cross-party consensus because I don't disagree with like a six-word addition to the motion. So I'm like, fine. I would rather have an important topic such as community safety unanimously debated and supported by council rather than making political points on a small manifesto line, because as we know, like those kind of funding mechanisms, they're up for discussion, and we're still yet to hear the budget, and I don't really mind so much, to be honest. So that was it, basically. So what did you think from watching the county council debate, Stephen?
You're on mute, Stephen.
I mean, there was. I think we were killing ourselves with agreement mostly during that whole motion section was like you say, just surprisingly uncontentious, because all of the motions were relatively sensible things that I think almost anybody would agree with. So it was nice to have that. Also nice that it was quite quick as well. So yeah, I enjoyed your motion. I spoke on the motion about, I wasn't intended to speak, which is the usual bullshit bingo card we have at county council, but I did speak on the A14 project. Well, it wasn't the A14 project, it was on national highways, not living up to their commitment to active transport and destroying, not leaving a very good legacy in their path and not learning lessons of the A14. So lots of the conversation was about kind of South Cambs, and I pointed out that the A14 project has almost cut the Ouse Valley Way in half because highways engineers didn't reinforce the banks properly under the A14, and it's eroding away. It's going to cut a 150-mile footpath in half if we don't fix it soon. And they can spend up £1.5 billion on supporting motorists and transport and mechanical transportation, but when it comes to walkers, they don't seem to be able to have the engineering knowledge to stop a massive section of bank eroding, which I think is crazy. So yeah, I'm kind of disappointed with national highways because they don't really live up to this commitment.
I mean, it's worth saying, Stephen, that banks eroding is an issue in Whittlesea as well, and that's not a national highways road.
Yeah. But there should be a solution to reinforcing a bank so it doesn't, because if you build a bridge over a river, obviously all the vegetation dies and there's nothing to support the banks anymore. So I think it was a good county council meeting, and also a relatively quick county council meeting. I thought we were going to be in there for the long haul, and we were out by about 3 o'clock.
I personally think it's quite positive to see a little bit of consensus as well. Even if it came about through an amendment, because it used to be very, very few and far between. I remember the one that I remember from when I was leader was the motion about the city deal. I think it was the first one that went through unanimously.
How did that work out?
Yeah, and I think, in fact, the next one that Steve Count did went through unanimously as well. But there needs to be more of it, because if you look at what the county council does and its role, the things it does around children's social care and adult social care, Alex is right. Social care in general, those things, they shouldn't be anything other than consensus about how we deliver them. They're the most important things the council does, and I think the reference to the white ribbon, I think, is important as well. And it's only worth, from a councillor's perspective, how close are councillors to issues like that? We'll go and have a look at what happened in West Northants. where the leader had to stand down because he was found out to be to have abused women. And so it makes you realise these things are important, and it's important that councillors discuss them, not only for the constituencies, but to remind members as well.
I mean, I do agree entirely. I sort of wind back from national highways. I mean, it does seem okay. In two examples, so maybe completely barking up the wrong tree, but they don't seem to be very good at the whole communications. I mean, you had when the works were being done here on detrunking the road over the station, or it's now the 1307. The comms on it, I don't think, were great, but also you had things like there were these plans for a transport hub at the station, which then seemed to fizzle and disappear, and they didn't really tell anyone about it, and very disappointing. And the same, with the when they handed over the road to the county council, took ages to get the relevant information, and there are all sorts of problems with it.
Well, we've had Paul Salmon on here, haven't we, from the A421 project, and that's one of the lessons they have learned, because in the A421 project, the communications are fantastic. The effort that Paul puts in with my parish councils and with anybody who contacts him is immense. I think that's really great. But actually, it's more of a philosophy that National Highways is funded to deliver roads, and everything else is a bit incidental. I think what it comes down to, and it feels like when we've been pushing really hard, me, Nick Johnson, Laura Davenport-Ray, who's a Green councillor, pushed really hard in these strategic stakeholder meetings for more active transportation along the route, and you can see that they get frustrated by it, but they're not that interested in delivering it because it's not their prime objective.
It's also worth saying the A14 project. First of all, the A14 project was delivered ahead of schedule and on budget, and they do deserve credit for that. If it looks like they a few bits they should have done that they didn't, but they do deserve credit for that.
Yeah.
And actually, the process in the run up to the delivery of the A14 and the consultation was quite good as well.
Yeah. I mean, compared to East West Rail, National Highways are leagues ahead as well. But I think there's still these issues which need to be resolved. So now it comes down to what you're funded for, doesn't it? Same as the Environment Agency is funded to save people's houses from flooding, and if they're not funded to stop roads flooding or lots of other things. And so if you're gonna, it's how you set the point system for the game, and if the point system is you're going to build big roads, then that's what they get scored on, and that's what's important to them. So in a lot of ways you can't blame them for not having as much social conscience as they should have, because that's not their core business and they don't get rewarded for it, unfortunately.
I agree with that, and but some of that is about government being a bit more joined up, and that's, to me, another argument for regional government, because you could coordinate a lot of that stuff a lot better and make different areas more joined up.
So the only other thing to say on county council is that it would have been a lot less agreeable had Steve Count's motion on the winter fuel payment gone ahead, which he pulled because he didn't like there's a bit of a game in local politics. If you see a motion that you don't like, you can either get it voted down, or you can try and amend it out of existence by taking all the teeth out of it. And that attempt was made by the joint administration. Steve Count didn't like it and pulled his motion. And we discussed exactly the same motion at HTC the week before, and what we heard there from the administration at HTC claimed that this is a political motion. This is playing party politics, and we had no, that's not the case. This is a serious issue. And of course, next morning, first thing they do, press releases out and memes all over social media saying, calling us out for not supporting older people. And so, it was a bit of a party political, national politics.
Target the Facebook post as well, like the classic "Your Lib Dem councillor voted to," do this terrible thing, which is very good template for the Facebook targeted adverts as well for the election.
I'm sure.
It's worth saying that it has appeared on councils on agendas for councils up and down the country. It's absolutely everywhere, and particularly in councils. where the Conservatives are in opposition and stuff. I've been watching it, and so there's a reality, which is this is CCHQ basically. And to be honest, it's very, very unlike the Conservatives. They're not normally like that. They normally make their own minds up about what motions to bring forward and stuff like that. They're not dictated to, and that may be a bad sign actually. That the Conservatives, because it's one of the things I sort of dislike about the Labour Party. Is they're very, very centrally controlled a lot of the stuff. The decisions they make at council, whether they go into coalition with somebody or whatever. The decision is made, the final decision on whether you can or can't is made by the Labour Party centrally and not by not local people. And actually, the Conservatives are not like that. And so for them to have this push down from the top, which seems to have been what happened to almost every council, I think is a shame.
Yeah. So to kind of following on from that, David teased the fact, David stepped away, but David teased the fact that Nigel Farage is going to target Fenland. And I'm not sure where that rumour has come from. But at County Council, I met with Guy Lackland, who was the Reform candidate in St Neots and Mid Cambs, who's a lovely chap. We should go out for a drink with him, Martin, because actually, we might not agree on his politics, but he's a fun guy. He said some things during the election debates which I completely don't agree with, but he'd be a great person to have a drink with. Anyway, Guy was there with several, I think 2 other Reform potential candidates, and Guy told him that Reform intend to put out a full slate of candidates for the county council elections in May, and that could change the picture completely, couldn't it? Because when you were involved with the county council, UKIP were a big factor, weren't they? And so everything's up for grabs, isn't it? We just looked at a by-election result which was more or less the same as it was before, but if you see Reform appearing on that, it's going to cut the Conservative votes in some way. And looking at my returns from the St Neots and Mid Cambs, I was getting my ass kicked in some areas of St Neots by Reform as well. And so everything's up for grabs if that's the case. What was your point? You're gonna I've just sport your tease, I think, on Nigel Farage. But what you heard about Nigel Farage and Fenland, David?
Well, there's an article in Cambs News, which I will it's Nigel Farage targets Northeast. So Reform UK has its eyes on Fenland for a recruitment drive to find candidates prepared to stand at 2025 as candidates at Cambridgeshire County Council. Buoyed by its performance in the July general election, which saw its candidates streak into second place behind former Tory Minister Steve Barclay, Reform lead Nigel Farage made a direct appeal for candidates. He may even find support from amongst current county councillors, especially those faced with the prospect of not being reselected by the Conservatives to stand in 2025. Cambs News understands that at least 2 existing county councillors may lose the support of the North East Cambridgeshire Conservative Association. Those most at risk are Simon King of Wisbeach, who represents the Roman Bank and Peckover and won his seat in 2021 with 1728, and Lib Dem Gavin Booth in second place with 895. Also facing the threat of possible deselection is Dave Connor, who comfortably won the Woodley South Division with 1,727 in 2021, well ahead of Labour in second place with 497 votes. But North East Cambs Conservatives have a plethora of district councillors, some recently elected, who relish the prospect of adding a county council seat to their portfolio of positions. Basically saying that Reform are... So GB News has published a copy of a letter sent by Farage that specifically targets disaffected Tory councillors in North East Cambridgeshire, and so on, basically saying that Reform are going to be, giving it a good go.
So some of the existing ones. So Simon Bywater came from UKIP. He's one of my favourite councillors. Simon's a great guy, but he came from UKIP, didn't he, and became a Conservative later on. So there might be some others of those who, I'm not saying Simon is going to be tempted, but there's a possibility people might be tempted in at the threat of losing their seats sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things here. First of all, from Simon's perspective, I used to talk about the sensible wing of UKIP, and that's where Simon very, very much came from. And they were people that they got, and I think you know, a couple of them said to me the reason we stood as a councillor was because we were asked, and you know, and there's a bit about who asked first. It makes a difference. But you know, Simon, I think, would say himself that he found himself surrounded by people he was uncomfortable with, and that's why he crossed the floor. You know, eventually, but and you know, Simon was always one that I thought it happened not long after I stood down as leader, but Simon was always one that I thought would do so, and there were a couple of others that did as well. And the nature, I suspect that if UKIP make inroads in May, the same process will happen. To be honest, UKIP, did I say Reform make progress in May? Yeah. Same thing. I suspect that the same thing will happen, and you know, I've said before on here, I don't think Reform's got a long life, and my suspicion is that we're going through the same cycle we did with UKIP. We'll go to the county council elections. Reform will be on a high. They'll do very well. It'll cause a bit of chaos at county, and then you know, and then they'll collapse because they'll realise. A lot of the people that are within it will realise how you know, what they're surrounded by.
It's also a lot easier to say that you're going to put a full slate of candidates out than actually do it, because there's 61 council seats, isn't there? And that's a lot of people. Finding 61 people, you know, at any level for any political party. Yeah, I think the Lib Dems and the Conservatives face a similar challenge, as do independents as well. I'd like to stand more people, not that we're a party, but I'd like to enable more people. But there's not that many people who want to spend their daytimes sitting in 5-hour county council meetings. So that's a good ambition, but whether they can deliver on it is not certain yet, is it?
It's a reality that county council is a lot of work. You know, it is a reality, and people should be open to that. And the other thing that happened with UKIP last time is that some of these people were told they weren't going to win, and they ended up winning riding on the back of a UKIP high. And some of these Reform guys, you know, potentially the same thing will happen, and then you get attendance issues and all sorts.
4 years is a very long time at county council, I can tell you.
Yeah, but I don't welcome their presence at county council as much as I don't welcome their presence anywhere, to be honest. I'm not a fan of Reform and what they're about. I think the more politics drifts to the left and to the right, the more difficult and the more undeliverable it becomes. And I fear for it, because I do think Reform are going to do very well.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think from the point of view, if I was like the Reform, you know, central party office, it kind of makes sense as like, you know, if they think, and probably they think they will still be around and I'd be probably more powerful at the next general election. And in those seats, in those parliamentary seats where they came second, you can kind of see the strategy of let's win county seats, let's have people locally, and then we can do better the next election. I think this happens in other seats as well across the UK where Reform came second, like they are investing a bit more in having local candidates than they would in areas where they maybe came fourth or fifth or last in some of the general elections. So I think it kind of like as a long electoral cycle strategy kind of makes sense. But I also agree with Martin. I'm not sure at the next general election whether Reform will be on this high they are at the moment, having like 20% of the polling nationally.
I'd be interested to see if any of the same people come out as well. Because remember, there was Peter Reeve in Ramsey as well, and UKIP did very well in parts of Huntingdonshire as well last time.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting if the same sort of people come out of the woodwork. I hope not, but I fear that they will be of the same ilk, because some of the issues we dealt with at county council. I mean, I'm going to say it. The worst one. There was a racist incident at a police station, at a fire station with a UKIP councillor that I'm not going to talk about. But the one that I do remember is one of the UKIP councillors we had at the inductions that we had some of the looked after children come in to talk to councillors about what life is like being in care. And one of them stood up and asked the question and said, what's it like being a taker from society, to one of these children?
And knowing Simon Bywater, he used to be a UKIP councillor. Simon is one of the most vocal supporters of young people in care, always, isn't he? Every single motion at county council to do with young people who've been in the care system, Simon is a prominent supporter of that. So he couldn't have been too pleased on being associated with that kind of behaviour. So yeah.
I mean, it's not clear to me. I mean, it's not always clear for any national political party what they're doing locally, but you get a broad idea. But it's like with reform, what are reform's local government priorities? You know, what's their manifesto going to look like for Cambridgeshire? Now, for a lot of things, it'll be national issues. You know, but it's. You know, is it going to be just, lots of roads and stop all this woke nonsense, which ends up just being disruptive and sort of kind of toxic?
Well, I mean, that was it last time. The big thing they rode on last time was one of the big things. Obviously, there is an agenda about how we support asylum seekers in the county and things like that are really important, actually, and how we manage it. There's them things. But one of the things they rode off the back of and made a big play on was the fact that none of the councillors were going to be whipped. And actually, it was never the case. And there was a huge amount of whipping went on. And they were probably worse for that than any of the other parties in the council, to be honest. And I just think, what I hope people will think is, well, we've been here before and it didn't help Cambridgeshire. So, why would we do it again? But the people will vote based on national issues, and I fear that they're going to do very well. And it won't do the county any favours.
Yeah. Should we go on to the last issue?
Can I just say I've got to go early today, but because I'm leaving doesn't mean I'm running up to fill my my Reform Party UK applications for next election. Those rumours are completely untrue.
That's good. That's because you've already done them.
Yeah, obviously. Right. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. Bye.
Yeah.
See you later, Stephen.
Bye. I mean, well, maybe if we can dwell on reform a bit longer, maybe. I don't know. There is a thing also that there's people who voted for reform, but who also stood for reform. I think basically as a politics isn't working type of thing, which I get.
It's the one thing I agree with reform on, by the way, is PR. I have to say, but for different reasons, I suspect. But yeah.
Yeah, but the thing is, you've got this is a strain that goes back. When it goes back to the referendum party, then UKIP, and the Brexit party, reform, and so on. There's, apart from the headline issue that they talk about, they are also sort of campaigning, trying to position themselves as a broader party to the right of the Conservatives, but also being populist. And by populist, I mean they say they have a sort of somewhat simple and Manichaean view of politics and society. And I know. I think it is kind of dangerous because things are more complicated than that.
No, absolutely, it's very, very dangerous. And the position on, as an example, asylum and immigration is a great example. Asylum and immigration is an international problem. There's no two ways about it. If you look at every major Western nation, just about is suffering from issues around asylum and immigration. America, all of Europe. Including us. And so this notion that all you can do is put a big fence up around the UK and pretend it's anything other than an international problem is daft. But the extremes of politics, the more you get into a drift to the extremes and you see people blaming others for the failings of a country, the more dangerous politics is. and that's why, this thing about PR and stuff like that. I have this thing about the centre ground needs to start driving the change and the move towards PR, because otherwise it gets driven for the wrong reasons. But and that's what reform are about. They're about making political grounds through blaming immigration and asylum. That's a reality, and it's not. There's nothing in there that is providing a solution to anything.
Okay. I think that is probably true of much of the party, but I said I think in a way that isn't necessarily true of other parties. People voted for them, and I think stood as candidates for them without having a sort of clear view of what they were, and it was like, oh well, it's something different. We'll try, we'll try this. Sometimes. I mean, I think. Some of the stuff Reform has already come out with, and in its previous manifestations, is pretty unpleasant.
Yeah, I mean, there's some things that are like just unpleasant that have been said by, some candidates. But I think overall my issue with this, which is why it's kind of dangerous, especially for local government, where you need people to be quite pragmatic given the, financial pressures of local government across the UK, is the promises of simple solutions and this politics of, let's look at immigration, for example, what they said in the general election. Those are all like kind of like very simplified ideas, which are appealing when you read them, or when some people read them for the first time. But when you dig into those, they're either not deliverable or like not possible within the current legal context that we have. So, saying freezing all non-essential immigration, right? So you might be someone thinking like, oh, well, okay, we have too many migrants in this country. Let's freeze all non-essential immigration. How do you define this? Like, how do you get to the understanding of what is needed and what's not? The other thing, they had the employer immigration tax, like raising national insurance by 20% for people employing foreign workers. Again, it would be like a very bad thing for businesses who are relying, unless you provide an alternative of like, okay, we'll train all the stuff that you need, then, obviously it's so unfair for small business, and people against it.
We've also got a declining birth rate, and there's an issue around that as well, which it's the same sort of libertarian drift towards libertarianism that is demanding lower taxes as well, and the idea of a diminishing birth rate and lower taxation is a fallacy. It's just utterly not deliverable, not with pensions and our pension system framed as it is at the moment. And you're not going to change the way our pension system is funded overnight. It'll take a generation or two to change it. So, even that, but at a local level, things like social care. We know social care needs reforming. We know it needs sorting out. And I hope it's something that the Labour Party do bite the bullet and deliver, rather than just throwing a bucket of money at it. But it's a complex issue. You can't just come in and say, we're going to sort it, we're going to cut the budget for social care, because you won't. You just won't. It's those things that sort of worry me, where a simplistic message through a door is really, really easy. But it's actually deceitful as well.
It's interesting because all of these, this is going a long way from Cambridgeshire, but the Tea Party in the States started off as a sort of small tax responsible government libertarian thing, and rapidly morphed into this quite unpleasant populist thing that then became Trump. There is a conveyor belt there. There's people who are there for the libertarianism and then drop out, but it seems that quite a few people end up being dragged along to the sort of populist side of things as well. And it's like saying with the, I think everybody listening to the show probably knows basically what county councils do is social care and education. And there's a little bit of money left over for a few things. And at the moment, it's basically, what are we going to cut this year to try and make the sums, come a bit closer to adding up. Similarly with, pensions and so on, there's the pressures on an increasingly small number of working people to support people who, for whatever reason, aren't working are growing. But then you also see the sort of result of decisions that have been made over the past. There was a chart going around, I think, from the FT about money that was spent on building social houses versus money paying rent for social houses effectively. The result of that has been money effectively being transferred from the state to the private sector for some time, and that just means there is less money going out in the state. If rent is being paid to private landlords instead of to renting a council house, that is money going out of the state and to into the private sector, and that has an effect. But the other thing is, these aren't things that are going to be turned around quickly. Yep. If you look at a lot of these issues, these are issues that are going to take 1, 2, 3 parliaments to fix, or council terms, or whatever it is. So it's
it needs for councils to fix it. It needs government to enable councils to fix it as well, and that's a significant issue as far as I'm concerned as well. But the point about 2 terms is right, and it's one of the things I'm glad on some things Keir Starmer's talked about 10 years, because that's how we need to start talking, and we need to have more discussions. The infrastructure needs of our country, at the very least, are going to take 10 years, and that's if we get a shift on. It's a lot of Conservatives are going to balk at the budget next week because of the changes to borrowing and stuff. But actually, we need an emphasis on delivering infrastructure, and we need thought about how we deliver infrastructure and enable it. And it's interesting. I bet one of the things that Conservatives will do is be selective about what the IMF said about Britain's situation, financial situation this last week. Actually, one of the things they did was support the approach for funding infrastructure that is going to be taken. We need to do it. It's the thing we used to be great at. We had an economy built around the fact that we delivered the railways, as an example, and we just don't do that anymore. We fight to get every single bit of infrastructure delivered in this country, and that's not just a political failing. We've become a country that's very, very resistant to change, and that has to change, and we have to start talking about it. That you cannot expect a country to deliver change and it not to affect you and not to impact on your backyard.
No. I mean, on which, should we go on to Angela Rayner's speech to the Local Government Association?
Yeah.
Because this was the Deputy Prime Minister at the Local Government Association, and there's actually quite a few interesting things that came out of that. I mean, some of it. I mean, obviously, some of this, or a lot of this, requires legislation. Some of it we'll get the details in the budget and so on. And there's been a few other things that have been discussed as well. One is strengthening audit of local government, which I thought was interesting. Another was councillors not having to share addresses, so that your address doesn't have to be public, which I think is a good thing. Another is giving councils the power to address poor conduct. And actually potentially so they can be suspended. Stuff about supporting councils with shared solutions and with recruitment, and also allowing hybrid or virtual meetings, so that council meetings you could attend a council meeting virtually. I mean, some of those are potentially quite big. So the Audit Commission was got rid of some years ago. But actually I think there's proper audit of local councils is actually quite a good thing, not least for giving early warning of when things are going wrong.
Yes and no is what I would say, and then I would say yes and no to a lot of the stuff here. The fear I have is we're going back to John Prescott's day, and some of the things John Prescott did in morally and probably that they were the right thing to do, but they became huge bureaucracies. And so, the audit regime is a good example where effectively you had an independent organization, in theory, putting councils effectively in special measures, just through the audit regime. It became hugely bureaucratic, and it started to involve councils taking the audit commission to court and all sorts of things, and throwing public money away on stuff like that. So it depends on what it means, because if you're going to create massive bureaucracies out of it, you've got to watch it. And I would say the same about council conduct, that what happened, the regime we had with the Standards Board for England and all sorts of things, it became a horrendous political tool, with councils using the fact that something was going to the Standards Board for England, or council laws, sorry, as a political tool, putting leaflets through doors about it and stuff like that. And then and there was also a huge bureaucracy there as well. It doesn't need that, but what it does need is a local solution where you can actually properly penalise councillors for misconduct. And what happened was, the legislation went one way and went too far on the onerous side of it, and then when Eric Pickles came and reined it back in, it basically became toothless. And you need to find the centre ground, is what I would say. I'm always talking about the centre ground, but there you go.
Yeah, I mean, there's a balance there, but yeah.
Yeah. Did Angela Rayner also talk about making the mayoral elections back?
So I think that was a different announcement, I think, or possibly it was also at the LGA.
It was in the same conference, but I think what was announced is, I think in a response to a session, that yes, we're thinking about doing a white paper on this change, which is interesting, because then when this came out on Twitter, some of my friends were like, oh, they're going to do this before May. And I'm like, I'm not so sure, because if you're doing a white paper before Christmas, the likelihood for the change to be implemented before the May elections is quite low, in my opinion.
Well, it doesn't need a white paper either.
But that's what I said. Yeah,
it's secondary legislation. She could do it at the stroke of a pen.
Yeah,
and personally, I think she should. I think the idea of a mayor as a single person representing a county, it needs he needs a bigger buy-in than just a first past the post system. I'm not a big fan of first past the post anyway, but I certainly don't think it works for mayoral elections. I think second preferences and the like are really important in the mayoral election. So I hope she just has the strength to just sign a bit of paper and say, yeah, let's go back to what it was.
Well, I hope so too, but I think why they said in the conference they're planning a white paper including this is because I can see also the argument of Labour working towards like a another democracy bill with all the other stuff in one, such as the manifesto promise on votes at 16 or other changes to elections. However, like on this one, I do think, yes, you don't need the white paper, you don't need to necessarily integrate it part of a broader democracy reform bill for this one.
So what I mean, it's possible she could make the change now through secondary legislation and include it in a white paper.
Yeah.
Because that might enable what it might also do is if you bring it into a white paper and make it in future so you can only change it by law and through primary legislation, that might be a good thing in reality, because it will stop what happened last time, which was literally a stroke of a pen because somebody didn't like some results.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, so this is going to make me sound very partisan, but I think that the voting system was changed just for partisan advantage by the Conservatives. They're changing it back is a fairer system, but then it also looks partisan.
Yeah.
And I don't think it is. I think it is a makes, as you said, for a system like that, having that kind of some sort of way of expressing a more nuanced vote than one thing. Is
that true though, David, or is it would the Lib Dems support it? Because my gut instinct is the Lib Dems would support something that moved away from first past the post.
But it looks, and it can be argued to be like, oh, you're just changing it to make sure your guy gets in.
Well, I'm not sure that's true, because they did pretty well in first past the post last time, the Labour Party did, with the mayoral elections. If you think what happened last time, Andy Street lost. Andy Street wouldn't have lost, I don't think, if it had been if it had been a PR system. So I'm not sure it's true. I just think it's the right system. But somebody will try and portray it that way. That's true.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting one to watch, and like you say, it's when you've got a single person sort of representing quite a big area, and who is doing delivery and so on. I think you need something, as you say, that a system that means you have more buy-in than. I mean, I would just go for, preference ranking all the way down, rather than the first and second preference.
I mean, I'm a fan of PR anyway, and I think second preference votes for a mayoral system it makes sense anyway. But as I said, I come from a position of bias as well. My particular view is that that if we move to a centre ground system, I think a PR system in general in this country, I think the centre ground of British politics would be in power forever. And I think that's a good thing. I think if it might be the right of centre or the left of centre that holds the balance of power, or holds the majority of it, but it will be the centre right or centre left. I'd much prefer that than this occasional drift to the left or right that we have, where they exercise undue influence, which is where we are at the moment. But I fundamentally with the mayors, the idea that it can be 20-25% of the electorate supports one man who has influence over the whole of them, I think is flawed.
I agree. I do agree. Right. I think that's probably everything for today, unless there's anything anybody wants to wrap or to add in.
Yeah, can I plug my marathon again?
Go for it.
The reason I'm wearing a onesie today is because Stephen Ferguson dared me to do it because of something in my past that involved Paul Stainton. And it was because of my marathon. So I'm running a marathon on Sunday, 2 days after my 60th birthday. If anybody would like to sponsor me, can somebody put the link up? Is that all right? It's in the comments.
Yep.
If anybody would like to sponsor me, it'd be fantastic. The charity we're supporting is amazing, and supports an amazing young girl that my wife knows. It would be fantastic if anybody would consider it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to post the link now. So I'll put that in comments, and so it's scrolling across now. But yeah, do please give generously to Martin's marathon.
Thank you all.
Well, good luck with the marathon, and happy birthday for today.
Thank you, and it's I'm looking forward to getting Sunday out of the way so I can have a nice few days in Frankfurt.
Okay, well, take care, everyone, and we will see you next week when I think we may be discussing the budget.
I'll see you then.
Okay, take care. Oh, sorry, I need to mention just one thing before we go. Favorite bus 305. Took it this week, and it's so there's now hourly buses from Ramsey to Huntingdon, and it connects up with the Ely Zipper, so it's much easier to get to Ely from Huntingdon, and it was a very nice bus.
Well,
so,
you'll be able to get from Whittlesey to Huntingdon by bus then, because by changing at Ramsey, which is important, because I know that one of the things that's being talked around in Huntingdonshire is this idea of using Ramsey as a transport hub. So it looks like that's already starting to happen.
It's not, and it's a good idea, but actually those most recent set of improvements are actually really good. Really pleased to see them.
Mm.
Okay, take care, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.
All.
Bye-bye.